Since ancient times, pandemics have lurked in the shadows of human history, each leaving its indelible mark. From ancient plagues that decimated populations to modern outbreaks that tested our resilience, pandemics have shaped the course of human history in heartbreaking and profound ways. Now, you and I just endured a pandemic that flipped our modern world on its head. Yet, compared to the plagues that our ancestors survived, COVID only scratches the surface. In this video, let's look at the worst pandemics of all time. Hey there, history lovers. Mr. Mayflower here with another deep dive into a fascinating story from our past. If you're a history buff, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And now, let's get into it. The first pandemic that we'll cover today is the one that you and I just lived through, COVID-19. Life was pretty different for us in 2020, 2021, and 2022. There was all the anxiety and social unrest, a staggering death toll. Our modern world effectively ground to a halt. Most sources now state that COVID killed around 7 million people globally, although depending on your news sources, that number is either much higher or potentially lower. The United States, Brazil, India, and Russia reported the most COVID-related deaths. COVID-19 was a stark reminder of the globalized world's vulnerability to pathogens. The rapid spread of the virus, facilitated by modern travel and urbanization, led to unprecedented challenges in containing the outbreak. COVID was also a humbling reminder that our advanced society was, in many ways, just as fragile and dark as ancient ones. Our descent into disarray and confusion happened swiftly, and our struggle for reliable data and scientific consensus was lacking, to say the least. The pandemic took a terrible toll in human lives and also in our economies. The total economic cost is estimated at more than 16 trillion, or roughly 90% of the annual GDP of the United States. Societally, the effects of COVID will reach far into the future. Kids were hardest hit, with millions of students kept out of school for years. Anxiety and fear were pervasive, social bonds were shattered, and educational trajectories were forever altered. Truly, these were some of the weirdest years to be a child in modern history. COVID involved a swift 2-year spread before simmering down, unlike our next pandemic, which has raged far longer. The HIV virus appears to have originated in chimpanzees and jumped to humans around 1900. From there, it stealthily spread across Africa and later to other continents and countries. HIV arrived in the USA around 1970, but its impact wasn't fully felt until the 1980s, when the CDC and the New York Times began reporting on a new immune system disorder. Initially, the disease seemed to strike only homosexual men, so it was referred to as gay-related immune deficiency, or GRID. The CDC later discovered all the ways that HIV spread, including among heterosexuals and women, and adopted the term AIDS. By the end of 1983, there were 3,064 diagnosed cases of AIDS in the United States, and of those, 1,292 people died. That is a 42% fatality rate. By 1986, over 20,000 cases of AIDS had been reported, with its ominous presence detected in every corner of the globe. Today, the number of infected people stands at around 38 million, with more than 2/3 living in sub-Saharan Africa. The WHO estimates that 40 million people have died of AIDS-related illness, but with improved medicines and improved access to those drugs, annual AIDS-related fatalities have declined dramatically since 2010. Today, when treatment is started early, people living with HIV can expect to live nearly as long as those without. The same cannot be said about the next deadliest plague known to mankind. The Byzantine Empire was struck by a devastating outbreak known as the Plague of Justinian, one of the first recorded pandemics in history. Named after the reigning emperor Justinian, this pandemic is believed to have been caused by a bacterium that lives on rodents and their fleas. This is the same pathogen responsible for other plagues, including the Black Death, which we will discuss shortly. Originating in Egypt, the plague spread through the Mediterranean, killing millions and crippling the Byzantine Empire. Its impact was catastrophic, with historians estimating that at its peak, the plague was responsible for the deaths of 5,000 people per day in the capital of Constantinople. The pandemic reoccurred in waves throughout the Mediterranean basin until the year 750, weakening the Byzantine Empire and altering the course of European history. The Justinian Plague is estimated to have killed 30 to 50 million people. That is about half the population of the entire world at the time. This plague demonstrated the role of trade routes as a mean for disease spread, a pattern that would be seen in future pandemics. The plague of Justinian set a precedent for how a disease could shape the geopolitical landscape, contributing to an empire's vulnerability to internal strife and future invasions. Smallpox was a familiar menace in Europe, Asia, and Africa for millennia. The earliest physical evidence is found on Egyptian mummies who died 3,000 years ago. During the 1700s, smallpox killed up to 400,000 Europeans each year, including 5 reigning monarchs. It claimed a fatality rate between 20 and 60%, and over 80% when it came to children. But those horrific figures are nothing compared to when smallpox hit the New World. You see, survivors of smallpox in Europe, Asia, and Africa built up immunity over hundreds of years, effectively coexisting with the disease. The indigenous populations of the Americas had no such immunity, and they stood horrifyingly naked against the viral behemoth. The initial outbreak began in April 1520 when a Spanish ship landed on the shores of present-day Veracruz, Mexico, and unintentionally unleashed the virus upon the native inhabitants. Smallpox killed up to 8 million people in Mexico at that time, including the Incan ruler. But this was just the beginning of a perfect viral storm that went on to devastate the Americas. Within a few generations, the continents of North and South America were almost completely depopulated. Academics put the horrific death toll at 56 million people. That's up to 95% of the native inhabitants. This great dying, as it came to be known, lasted for hundreds of years, extending from the furthest frozen reaches of Alaska to the loneliest outposts of Patagonia. Whole civilizations were robbed of their legacies, and the virus really shaped the cultural landscapes of the Americas that we know today. And yet, New World smallpox still wasn't the deadliest pandemic of all time. The Spanish flu of 1918 to 1919, or the H1N1 influenza virus, stands as the second deadliest pandemic in history. Unlike the pandemics that preceded it, this one struck in the modern era, taking advantage of the global movements of World War I to spread rapidly across continents. While other pandemics primarily affected the very young or the elderly, the Spanish flu proved to be especially devastating among healthy, middle-aged adults, especially fatal for people between the ages of 20 and 40. This made the virus particularly unusual and terrifying at the time, leaving behind countless orphaned children and devastated communities. The sickness came on like any other flu, with fevers and chills, but then came a deadly twist. The virus mercilessly attacked the lungs, leading to rapid deterioration. In some cases, individuals succumbed to respiratory failure within a matter of hours. The flu infected 1/3 of the world's population and claimed an estimated 50 million lives, with some estimates reaching as high as 100 million. Absolutely devastating, but still it wasn't as deadly as our next and final pandemic. The 14th century bore witness to the darkest plague ever unleashed upon humanity. Like a literal grim reaper, the Black Death descended over Europe, Asia, and Africa, leaving a trail of societal wreckage and human devastation in its wake. Between 1347 and 1351, this bubonic scourge, indiscriminately culled an unfathomable 75 to 200 million lives, including a third of Europe's population. The pandemic's ruthless spread was facilitated by the bustling trade routes of the time, illustrating the double-edged sword of increased connectivity among different regions. Wherever the Black Death passed, it inflicted a harrowing body count. This was nothing less than an upheaval of the mortal world itself. Entire social and economic structures imploded as labor grew precious and the feudal system's foundations crumbled. Even the medieval church's iron grip loosened as a traumatized flock questioned whether any cosmic order could permit such misery. Yet the Black Death's generational scarring also gave paradoxical birth to a cultural renaissance, prioritizing human life and raising the station of the individual. The societal upheaval led to significant economic and labor changes. Surviving workers demanded higher wages, weakening the feudal system. The plague also bred reinvention in health practices, sanitation, and community safeguards against future pandemics. As the deadliest pandemic in history, the Black Death reshaped the course of history, setting the stage for the end of the Middle Ages and the dawn of the Renaissance. It remains a symbol of the catastrophic potential of pandemics and their ability to reshape the world as we know it. The deadliest pandemics of all time remind us of the perpetual battle between humanity and infectious diseases. They underscore the necessity of vigilance, scientific inquiry, and solidarity in the face of infectious threats. Thanks for diving deep into the history of these tragic pandemics with me, Mr. Mayflower. If you love fascinating stories from our past, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.